Good evening, Rachel.
Good evening. My apologies. I've just run over on a difficult call, so I'm sorry I'm late joining you.
You're instantly forgiven. That we know you've got a lot on today, and you won't turn away and snigger and not answer our questions like some members of government might have done. So lovely to see you. You're very politic. I think you need no introduction to anybody here. Rachel is, I say, as well as an old friend, a very good MP for York Central. And really, we've got, she needs to get away by 8 o'clock sharp. That's still true, is that, Rachel?
No, I'm more flexible now.
Well, we won't keep you much more than an hour anyway. The evening sort of is yours. We're obviously pro-European, we're York for Europe. You know, you've been out with us in the long ago. We know which way your mind drifts. In fairness, we did invite Mr. Sturdy for a similar session, but he has declined. When we're rather disappointed. I think the floor is yours. We anticipated you speaking for a few minutes, and I know we've got some questions. We're particularly interested in Europe, how it affects our region, but if you want to give us some feeling of Westminster and party news, this is a lovely opportunity for us. So go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Don, and thanks everyone for giving up your evenings too. Obviously, there are so many issues to reflect on, and we're coming up to 6 years now since the referendum, and it feels to me that we haven't progressed. We have embraced those freedoms we were promised, and life for people across the country most definitely hasn't improved. We obviously have left a strong trading bloc and exposed our economy to the very worst of economic risks. We've seen more global instability and been exposed as a result of security threats. And of course, the internal culture wars in our country are only growing, not decreasing, and communities are being pitched against one another. And of course, we know that this is all being played out by the hostile environment in the Home Office and against refugees. And this is obviously deeply, deeply stomach-churningly, chillingly concerning. And it just shows, I believe, a deep racism which is at the heart of government, and that poison being spilt out across the country. And we have to be really aware of our history to understand what this could mean for our country. And it didn't end well, and it won't end well unless we take to the streets, make some noise, and are incredibly disruptive to stop this going ahead. And that's certainly what we need to do now. We here in Parliament, the Human Rights Act is going to be undermined with new Bill of Rights. We are going to see new legislation around Europe, get our Brexit freedoms, so we're told. And of course, these are all issues to be disruptive and create new culture wars. And obviously, the very arguments which were played out during all of those Brexit debates are now coming home to roost. And I think it is my regret that Labour are quite timid on this. I still hold to the arguments I made throughout that period, that what we should be arguing is not regressing into the various parts of Europe and into the system of Europe, but to come out bold and proud and to say very clearly that we believe in a much stronger, better Europe, greater cooperation, greater subsidiarity, and to look at that opportunity and that progression that we could have as European nations together to tackle some of the biggest challenges in our world, like the climate, like the food crisis we're now facing, like the security issues that we've got, the economies, but also to help other parts of the world, like developing countries, and to show and demonstrate what peace across the continent can look like and what the very best of us is. And I hold on to that to this day, because I believe in politics that it must be about leadership. And in leadership, you've got to lead. And tragically, that isn't what came from this. It showed a regress. And I think we've done that on a continuous basis. And now we have fearful communities. And we know that the quality of life is going down. I was just looking at the figures for York, life expectancy is falling. And on virtually every marker, we are now regressing. And that is troubling. And of course, the cost of living now just going through the roof, really being detrimental. And of course, and I'll start by talking about trade. You know, we've gone from the secure trading bloc into now new trade deals across the world, not respecting things like the environmental and kind of standards, not respecting animal welfare rights. Look at the Australian deal. And also, if you look at the New Zealand deal, that is going to threaten things like hill farming here. And of course, we continue to engage in despicable trade deals with places like Saudi Arabia, trading on arms, and etc. So this hasn't been about progress anywhere, and government are willing to sign and trade with whoever is willing to listen. And that means that poor deals are signed, but also it means that, you know, we are cap in hand to regimes such as Saudi, and where really we should be calling them out and dealing with their human rights. And of course, the expense of all of this is being felt in all of our communities. More expensive to move goods from further afield. We know that standards fall. And of course, the big area of trade is in the service sector and financial services. Britain no longer the lead country for financial services. And I never believed in the George Osborne cliff edge. I always believed, you know, it would slowly slip away. But unfortunately, as it slowly slips away, it's not only the jobs which are going, the services which are going, the businesses which are going, but also we are seeing the workforce going as well. And of course, that's having a catastrophic impact on our public services. We think about health and care. We think about losing the richness within academia, because these people have got choices. And of course, our relationship with the EU, if we look at that, we've got tariffs, we've got borders. If you live in Kent, you now expect Operation Stack to come into play. Lorries on the highway, you know, the great car park of the M20 and so on. So, you know, these are, you know, showing itself that this has gone badly wrong. But also, when you look at Northern Ireland, and I think that is still the telltale factor here, we know that is disrupting peace and the Good Friday Agreement, and it's disrupting trade. We've had episodes without food on the supermarket shelves, and we've clearly got this tug of war over the border. And of course, within Europe, Northern Ireland was cocooned because there were, you know, we all, on all sides, north and south, east and west, we were all united within one trade body. That's been ripped apart, and of course, that has exposed the rawness of what's happening in Northern Ireland, and we've seen it play out in just the last week with the DUP not sitting down with Sinn Féin for their good found reasons, I'm sure. But as a result of that, we've got unrest in Northern Ireland, and that risks escalation of what we brought under Labour back under control and into a place of peace and stability. And of course, you know, the public services over there are more starved than they are over here, which is also a big issue. And of course, ironically, the DUP championed Brexit, but they never answered the homework question of how do you deal with the border? And now they don't like it. They don't like the protocol. So things are in a pretty bad place, and you know they are going to war on this. It's very clear that, you know, we cannot have a land border north and south. You cannot control that. You know, you know, you need that flexibility, which has existed, which therefore means that the north has got to abide by the standards in the south. But then if that is true, without maintaining those standards on the east, i.e. Great Britain, you have to put a border in the Irish Sea. So if we really want freedom, as opposed to Brexit freedom, we have to have synergy with Europe. So this is going to be a very difficult time. It will be disruptive to the politics of Northern Ireland and will be regressive. And if parity was to be maintained, then you have to say, well, what was the point of leaving the EU in the first place, which I think many of us have made that argument time and time again. So this is going to be ugly. And it's clear that the Good Friday Agreement and stability is at risk. And of course, now DUP are saying that Article 16 could be triggered of the protocol, and that means there'll be no agreement. And that will push us into further unease. And I think we're seeing the rise now of the dispute yet again between nationalists and unionists, and we'd move forward. So I'm worried about that. And of course, there are just so many other things that we have lost over this time. To put it mildly, it's a complete mess. And I particularly think at this time about agricultural workers. We know we're just about to enter into a period of a severe global shortage of food because of the grain situation in Ukraine and Russia. And we need everybody working their socks off to make sure that every crop is picked, and we cannot guarantee that here. So these are really serious issues. Then we've got the situation in Ukraine, which has shone a light on a kind of how we interact as countries, kind of not only defense systems, but global security. And these are really challenging times. And of course there's NATO, but there's also the EU. And it's not just, of course, about defense systems and that security we give one another across Europe, but it's also about how we deal with things, for instance, the energy crisis now. And if ever there was time for collaboration and cooperation, against a dictator who is, inflicting atrocities on the innocent people of Ukraine, now is the time where we absolutely, desperately need that cooperation. I mean, the EU's been generous inviting Liz Truss along to many of their meetings, but we need to be in Europe because we need to stand against the dictator. That was the whole point of the alliance in the first place, is to ensure that there was solidarity, mutuality. And of course, we're now in a place where that is not occurring. And of course, this may not be the only conflict that we're going to be facing. We think, obviously, Russia, and who knows Russia's next move, and obviously we've watched with interest Ukraine and Moldova recognizing they need to be in the EU as well as NATO at the appropriate time. But we also, there's instability with China, what's happening with India. We're in a very fragile world, and of course, if there's a global food shortage, then we could be in a situation where there is more conflict. And certainly, I think one thing that we can guarantee is there's going to be far more refugees, because if you can't feed yourself, you're going to go to somewhere where you're going to be displaced. And of course, we know with displacement, often we see more conflict, and where we see more conflict, we see more displacement. So this is, on a global scale, turning very ugly as well, and we've got to take our responsibility for that. And therefore, I believe the issue of refugees is being evaded by the government, where absolutely we need to step up and play our part. And we've just seen over Ukraine, and I was with the ambassador yesterday, the Ukraine ambassador to the UK, and he was highlighting the freedom of movement people have got across Europe, free travel, free borders, and yet come to the UK and you have to go through so many hoops to just get a visa, and barely a third of the people which have made application are here. So this is really, really significant what is happening on the borders. And we saw the Objectionable Nationality and Borders Bill in the last Parliament, and now we've got a security bill, goodness knows what's going to be in that, and a Human Rights Act being destroyed. So this is really ugly stuff. On the other hand, government are saying we need our Brexit Freedoms Bill, and you know, obviously a way to spark a new culture war. Why not? And that's not me saying why not, that's them. You know, what's this going to do? It's going to challenge the retained EU law that we've got. They're unhappy the fact that the EU has the adjudication where the conflict arises, and want to ensure that the UK fully gets its freedoms, and therefore we can see probably a lot of ditching of that legislation. And the commentary at the moment is that that scrutiny will probably not come to Parliament, be handed straight back to the executive. So no, give us back control. It's give Mr. Johnson whatever control he wants to do whatever he wants. So it's certainly going to, and people are saying it will probably weaken parliamentary scrutiny as well. So this is the latest live issue that we're going to be battling with. And I think it's what's really important is obviously when this Freedoms Bill is published is that York for Europe get a grip of it and know it inside out, and that we do some really good work around the legislation to ensure that you know, we can be robust and know what we're going to be campaigning on, and to make the case evidentially as to what needs to happen. But at the same time, whilst no country, no political party really is saying they're beating a door back to Europe at the moment, I think we've got to talk about a new European alliance. We're seeing obviously the countries now from the former Soviet wanting to join. Of course, it will put questions in the minds of places like Denmark and Norway, although they obviously have a closer relationship than we do. But also, this is an opportunity for us, I think, to say we need one another across Europe. And this war has demonstrated that. And therefore, how do we reformulate in order to ensure that we have got the dialogue, the relationships, the cooperation, the mechanisms, the governance that we absolutely must have if we're going to build a safer and more secure world, on whether that's on our national securities, whether that is security for the most vulnerable refugees fleeing, or whether that is for food security, or whatever the issue. We need one another in this world, and certainly I believe we should be providing the leadership for that. I will leave it there because I've probably well and truly overrun my time for introductory remarks, and hand over to you, Don.
Thank you. Well, feel free to take any answers off in any direction, because that was fascinating to get such a summary.
Really good.
Thank you. Anybody? I know we were talking to a couple of, as you're on the screen, Christine. I know you were sharing a question you had. You had several. We'll have one each to start off with. Can you ask Rachel your question, please?
Well, the first one, I think Rachel's answered about the degree to what the present economic challenges are a result of Brexit. I think
yes,
they're quite a large degree. And the other one, Rachel, it was a great speech. Thank you very much. Very good. I just illustrated an example in West Yorkshire where there were 4 candidates standing for council. The 3 Liberal, Labour and Greens each put forward a candidate, and this opened the door to the Tories walking in. The person was unknown to the people in the area, whereas all the other people had worked tirelessly, and yet he got in. Why is that, Rachel? How can we have a situation like that? I'm afraid that that's going to be repeated if something isn't done about it.
Well, thank you for sharing, and I think we've seen it so many times. We certainly know that in 2017, had there been progressive alliances, we would have seen a Labour government. So, you know, these things really who matter, and forming some form of progressive alliance is going to be absolutely crucial if we're going to have any chance of winning the next general election. I think we saw from the results last Thursday that little step forward that Labour made as the Tory vote collapsed in so many places. People are splitting which direction they're going, and of course,
Yeah.
you know, that means the Tories will come through unless we form those alliances. I mean, it's very interesting to know today there's been an announcement in France, and I don't know if any of you picked up from the left-wing bloc in France, that they, the Greens, the Socialists, the Communists, have now formed a coalition, and it's a kind of stop Macron coalition. And of course, that's going to be quite important in being able to challenge back. You know, there's still independent parties, but there's kind of Nouvelle Union Populaire, Social et Écologique, I think it is. You know, this is a coalition which is going to put the challenge to Macron, is not going to let him get away with it. And I think unless we see that level of commitment across the parties, what we will see is the Tories will come through. And we have to be grown-ups in the room now with fighting fascism. And, you know, and when you're fighting fascism, you don't take your preferences with you. You have to be practical. And, you know, in some of the seats, it's going to be hard for Labour to win. You know, I'd rather see, to be honest, and I know they're in coalition for 5 years with the Tories, but I'd rather see a Lib Dem in Devon than to see a Tory. And, you know, and I think, okay, there may be some contested ground and we're going to have to be really smart at calculating it. But, you know, I personally think we should be putting up one, you know, candidate between different parties in some of these areas. And if that means Labour get a few less, but actually we'll be the party in power and we'll be the party controlling that coalition, well, that does me. I want to see a Labour government. I don't want to see, or a Labour-led coalition. I do not want to see the Tories back another day. So, you know, and my politics are certainly not on the kind of the right and compromising side of the party, but I do think we have to absolutely be practical about this and not proud. So that's our path to power.
So Rachel, can I just finish? Sorry, Don, but I just want, so what do you think that the opinion is within the membership and the parliamentarian Labour side about this coalition and really making it work?
Yeah, well, I think in politics you get to a point where you have to put all party interests aside and say, look, the people of our country, they're starving, they're freezing, they're being kicked out of their homes. We've got people who can't work, who are refugees, and most can't even come to our country. We're making promises around the world. We've got an economy collapsing and nothing is being delivered. And actually, the very worst coalition is going to be 1,000,000 times better than what we've got. And we just have to be practical, roll up our sleeves and kick the Tories out. And so for people that are going to moan and groan about it, I just think you've got to grow up and get a grip, because I do not want, you know, more coming this time. Imagine the Tories winning another general election.
No,
what's the next step to fascism? You know, what's the next step to persecution? That's
Rachel,
what we're seeing.
Can I interrupt? Because I think it's obviously something that the York for Europe discussed this. We've spent a lot of time. I think the question specifically is, if, to put it blandly, if all Labour MPs were like you, we wouldn't have any problems. And I'm not being unkind to your colleagues, because everybody varies their thing. How common are you in your party, to be specific? That's what's worrying us.
Yeah, well, all I can say is there are several MPs that I meet with on a weekly basis now, where we're having this conversation, and that group is growing. So we've got a call. I mean, it was Clive Lewis and myself which set it up, and that group is growing. and people are coming to our way of thinking, and we're working hard together to start having these discussions on a much wider platform, because if we don't, then quite frankly I'm worried about the future of even having a Labour Party, because we will go into insignificance. In Wales we may be all right, they're doing great in Wales, but clearly elsewhere it's of deep concern.
Thank you very much, that's very comforting. Sean, your hand is up.
Right, yes, thank you. I'm fascinated and delighted to hear your pragmatic view on this approach, Rachel, and it's clear that our democracy is at threat. It's being systematically eroded by this Tory government. In order to cement the sort of progressive alliance or democratic alliance that you're talking about, and which many other people across parties are talking about, would you agree that it's absolutely essential that Labour makes a positive and clear commitment to proportional representation, to give the positive incentive for other supporters of other progressive parties to vote tactically in those key marginal seats that Labour needs to win, and also that those sort of tactical voting arrangements need to be reciprocal in seats where frankly Labour can't win, but other parties such as the Liberal Democrats could potentially win?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, let's face it, first past the post suits the Tories, and therefore, it's the voting system of the Tories, and therefore we've got to find a way through. I've always said there's got to be a constituency link, because that is really important. And I have to say, being held to account, but also having a community I see kind of I put my arms around and have to look after, that is what makes an MP in our country. So I'd absolutely say, we've got to be able to still achieve that. But putting in a system where people's vote means something and can count is absolutely crucial, because it's not working. It's not working for anybody. Remember, we've got boundary changes coming up as well. They work in the Tories' favour. So they're fixing the election. And don't forget the elections bill, where they're going to restrain people from voting if they don't have ID. So, bit by bit.
And the threat to the Elections Commission as well, the Electoral Commission, obviously.
And everything else. Yeah. So, this is what happens when I say that kind of the march to fascism, they're shutting down our democracy as we go. So, of course, it's absolutely crucial that we challenge back anything the Tories want. We treat with suspicion, and we have to challenge.
Thank you. Peter.
Okay. Thank you.
Rachel, can't disagree with anything at all that you've said this evening. It's reassuring. But as an ex-Labour Party member who puts being in Europe above all UK party politics, whom should I vote for? People like myself vote for in the next elections, and maybe why as well?
I understand that the challenge of Labour in Europe. I really do understand that, and I understand obviously the whole wrestle that's gone on over the last few years. But the reality is, in York, if you're York Central, obviously I'm pro-European and forever will be, and I will continue to beat that path. In York Outer, Labour has proved time again is the only party to beat the Brexit sitting MP, Gillian Sturdy. So if you're serious about clearing out, and it's what happens locally, unfortunately, is what your vote does. People always say, oh, I want to give the leader a message. Well, leaders never get messages, I'm afraid. That's, they need to be in power for them to then exercise and start changing the culture of the country to then find the way forward. We've got to remember Keir Starmer, 100% pro-European, and he's gone shy now but being in power doesn't mean that that continues. And I think, you know, it's a very, culturally, we want to bring the country together. And that's going to be really important, because we do not want to keep going with culture wars and tug of war, and we never want the Tories to return again. So it's going to have to be a radical agenda on this front. But what I would say to you too is, if you're on the inside of the party, the weight counts, and we need people inside the party. And I know it's difficult. My goodness, I've looked at my membership card over the last 31 years, many a time. But we need progressives in the party, because that's how we keep the party in a far better place. So, you know, we are a coalition Labour Party. We are going to fall out. We're not always going to agree. That's healthy in politics, I think, to some extent. I'd like to, of course, find my perfect politician, and I'm certainly not it either. But, you know, I think, you know, having more progressives in the party does help us keep in the right place.
Right, thank you. I'll reiterate what Don says. You know, if we're all MPs were like you, we wouldn't have any problems. Sadly, I reside in New York Outer, so Sturdy is my MP.
Get rid of him.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. Good evening, Hong. You have a question for Rachel.
Yes, I do. Good evening, Rachel. Good evening, Don. Yes, many thanks for the very interesting presentation. I've got an observation and a question for you, please. The observation is, you remember when Boris Johnson just became the Prime Minister, he has promised that he's going to turn the UK into Singapore on Thames, all right? I'm from Singapore myself, and I don't really look forward to that for obvious reasons. Singapore only has one part, technically one party, and the opposition is very, very, very weak, all right? So if that ever happens, I fear for the Labour Party, all right? That's my observation. The question is with regards to Europe. Since this is a York for Europe, right? I have a question with regards to Europe. Do you believe that the current position of the Labour Party, which is we need to make Brexit work, is actually what it means is that in reality, after they win the election, they're going to be closely aligning themselves back, align the UK back to Europe, and of course rejoin in the near future. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong. A great question as always. And I mean, the Tories want to destroy the Labour Party, of course they do. But where we come to on Labour and Europe, I mean, Keir, since being leader, has never said that he wants us to rejoin the EU. That's, you know, he's said that because he recognises that still half the country, probably less than half the country now, want to continue in that Brexit position. So he does want to bring communities together, but also to find paths into Europe. And I mean, Europe's going through at the moment its own internal review. We've got to remember that it's got its own exercise. I asked if the government in the UK was participating in that, because I thought it would be a jolly good idea if we were, but we're not. But as for Labour, you know, we've got to remember, first of all, Ukraine has changed everything. And we're going to come out of this situation very, very different. And as a result of that, we have got to think about what are the alliances, you know, that build the security for the world in the future. And at the moment, we're just looking at the issue of security around defence. And that's really been in the spotlight for all the obvious reasons. But then energy, food, economy, you know, all of these things, and the climate. Now, these are massive. I mean, the climate issue is far bigger than the Ukraine issue of what's happening. And unless we get to grips collaboratively with other countries, how on earth are we going to start seeing some levelling up, to take a term, of developing countries, you know, and start addressing the real crisis which is happening there? Because if you're talking about food security, that is going to be the biggest issue on this planet, and half of that's due to climate. So if we're not working collaboratively with our European friends, we're not going to be able to address these issues. And I think we may see, I mean, it's quite interesting they're talking about new defence alliances, which are going to be much more inclusive globally. So it'll be kind of NATO plus. I think we will see a kind of Europe plus, where we will see new alliances forming as well. We're kind of split at the moment into the progressive world and the regressing world. And if you think, I go back to the UN General Assembly votes on Russia. We saw 5 countries, including Russia, voting with Russia, Belarus, Russia, Eritrea, I forgot the other 2.
North Korea, actually.
Yeah, North Korea, that's right. So kind of that communist band. But if you think of the number of countries which then voted in a different direction, it was really quite remarkable. And a number of countries we are going to have to fight for, which sat on their hands for all sorts of different alliances and reasons. And we have to fight for their future. And whilst we could be critical of the Prime Minister's recent visit to India, it was a very important visit because he was trying to pull them away from India, from Russia in our direction. Now, it was unsuccessful, but we need that kind of alliance across Europe to say, actually, Johnson, you're not the best person to go. Macron, you go, or, you know, whoever it is. So the world order is changing, and we are deciding who are the partners we need to trade with, to work with, to address climate with, to address defence and energy security and all those other issues. Europe has got a major role to play in that. And of course, it's got its own energy crisis as well. So I say collaboration across a new world order is going to be what's needed. And, you know, we're in this Ukraine situation for a while, but it's put the spotlight on all the weaknesses there are globally, and that's what we've got to address.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for that. Just a word to Boris, if you got a chance, right? Just remind him, Singapore is also in the Union, ASEAN Union. So Singapore is not a totally free-standing nation. They're also in the Union called ASEAN. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for that.
Point. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong. Nice to see you again. Right, we've got next is Richard. Your mic's on. Your question for Rachel, please.
Yes. A very long time ago, before the Good Friday Agreement, I attended a session in the House of Commons where there was a private discussion with MPs after the meal. There was one of the Ian Paisley's members there, and somebody asked a question, what's the solution to the Irish problem? And believe it or not, his response in privacy was, there's only one solution, we must sit down and talk about it. Now we can see where we are today. Do you see a simple solution to the Irish protocol situation? And I ask that in innocence.
Yeah, it's a question we've been asking for 6 years, and there is no solution that can be found outside having parity north, south, east and west. And the reality is that if you put a border down the Irish Sea, as we have at the moment, the DUP and the Unionists kick off. And if you put a border across Ireland, then the Nationalists kick off. So there is no solution that can be found unless there is complete parity across the UK and Europe, you know, and the Republic. They've all got to be within the same terms of trade. So it wasn't answered then, and it isn't answered today. And they've had 6 years to think about it, or you could argue 7 years since they started the referendum discussions. So I do not have the solution apart from we have to have parity with Europe. And if we have parity with Europe, it might as well be in Europe. So it's one of those questions that will forever spark, I think, until we find a safe union where there is parity. And of course, and that's because there's been divergence, and what we're going to see this year is increased divergence because of these Brexit freedoms. So it's going to get worse, not better. And that's why I think at some point, because of the theatre of Northern Ireland politics, I think there is a very good chance that we'll see the DUP trigger the protocol. I think that's what Jeffrey Donaldson would want to do at some point. Not yet. I don't think we're at that point yet, but I think that that could well be coming.
Thank you. I mean, I can't see a solution, but it's nice to know that you can't either, in a way.
In a way, yes, in a way. Okay, thank you, Richard. And before Martin, I've got a question myself. And we ask our councillors the same question, given what you've told us. I think it's so encouraging that you're doing your job you are, Rachel. Hang on, I just want to switch Richard off. What can York for Europe do to help you?
Thank you, Don. Well, I think obviously we continually need to make the case about how we as subjects or whatever we're classified as citizens of the continent of Europe have got a responsibility to work as closely as possible with the EU members and the non-EU members and recognise the tectonic plates are shifting. I further think that we've got clearly this legislation coming through and we have to be organised behind it. This legislation will be technical. It will be, the government will put out a line, we've heard it already, Brexit freedoms, this is, you get your freedom back, a load of nonsense. So we have to obviously communicate back into our community what these regulations will actually mean. And I think we have to be very good at communicating that because there's a lot of information. I don't know the scale of what they're talking about. I don't even know if they've completely scoped out the scale of what they're talking about. I kind of, we've heard the bonfire on regulations before, and there's 2 in, 1 out, and all the rest of it, or whatever it was. We haven't seen anything come out of that. So it could be a load of hot air and then some wrangling around the European courts. I suspect that's where we'll get to because they're not sophisticated enough to think otherwise. But I think we're going to have to see what's in the legislation. And I suspect it will also be a framework bill. So it will be about enabling a process. But we must remember the EU still have command. The deal with the EU is not a one-way ticket. The EU has got command over that. And the little we got, and I know some people disagreed with the way that I voted on the EU-UK agreement, but personally I think a bad deal is better than a no deal. But and it was a framework bill a deal in itself. I think we could end up, seeing that being challenged back as well. So that was the deal which was agreed in January 2020. Yeah, 2020. So and I know that the deal was very hollow. I mean, I sat and spent my Christmas and I read it cover to cover, and worked my way through the biscuits I got for Christmas to try and keep me going. It was really hard going stuff, but within it there was a framework where you could actually, I believed, if you had a government with imagination, build quite a secure relationship with Europe and quite progressive, and you could claw your way back through it. But if that's ripped up, then it could put us in a very bad position. So I think things could get quite fractious. I think there will be a lot of finger pointing at the EU, and I think what we have to do is talk through what this piece of legislation is going to achieve and what we want to see as an alternative. So I think we've got a great opportunity this year to open up a more progressive discussion again on Europe and just remind people of what we've lost.
Right. So I take away from that, we've got to give publicity on the streets to what's going on and try and communicate with the public like we've been trying to do for 6 years. But thank you. More to come, folks. Martin, your shot, please.
Yeah, Rachel, thank you for your introductory session. It really cheered me up, I have to say. But I do have a question which is related to the problem, I think, that still exists around Brexit, is that people like us who are kind of Brexit nerds have these very esoteric conversations about, you know, how it affects policies and how it affects relationships. And most people in York, I suspect, do not relate to Brexit and in the terms in which we talk about it. So my question to you is, what would you say are the most obvious practical consequences of Brexit for the community of York? In other words, how has it hurt us detrimentally in ways that people would recognise or at least understand?
Dentists, care workers. So it's the workforce, hospital staff. That has definitely been the most detrimental impact directly on the city, and the deficits we've got, we can't fill. So that's, you know, and we're seeing it across the economy. So we're seeing it across hospitality, and the chilling impact is not just that people have gone back to the EU, but people aren't coming to the UK. So as you know, we're replenishing our workforce because young people were coming over and settling and having families and making the UK their home. They're not anymore. So actually, we're not seeing that replenishment coming across the UK. For our young people, things like losing the Erasmus and turning to the Turin scheme has been a massive detriment, a real loss of opportunity culturally, and to engage. Research, we must remember the University of York was probably one of the most successful universities at getting EU funding. And I've talked to researchers there who have said their research has regressed as a result of that, both through the finances and the collaborations. And of course, that will impact on people's, you know, whether it's medicine or whatever, the advances. And then, of course, for businesses which trade directly with the EU, there has been tariffs, borders to navigate, etc. So that's been difficult as well. And therefore, you know, there's been a range of challenges which have directly impacted on our city. Culturally, we're poorer, there's no doubt about it. And we've just lost the opportunity to ensure that, you know, we can be very proud European partners and neighbours, you know, and you know, and I think there is a hollow in who we are because of what has happened, and that's hard to put into words. But I think what we've seen across the country at the moment, a confusion, because people are saying on one hand, and this is what I've heard over the last year, on one hand, we wanted to break those links with Europe, but when it comes to Ukraine, we understand our responsibilities. And actually, people are picking and choosing. And this is the toxic agenda, which no one's talking about. And that is about cultural identity and race. And this is what obviously the Brexit was silently playing on and continues to. And that takes us to a very dangerous place, and that hasn't gone away. And whilst we're often cocooned in York, and we must remember, in my constituency, I know every single ballot box returned a vote to remain in the EU, and we watch those ballot boxes like a hawk. You know, people are Remainers in our city from every community. That wasn't the same all over the country, and it's turned quite ugly in some places in the country. So, you know, we've got a lot of work to do in order to ensure that that issue around culture and race is upheld, that we're all, you know, that we fight for the equality that we believe in. And that is going to be the toughest challenge over the next few years.
Okay, thank you
very much. I'm going to still not going to let this go on too long, because I think Rachel's done pretty long day's work already by the sound of it. I've got one more question from Barbara Lodge, which I'll hear in a minute. Did you have a, Nadia, did you have a question that you put in the chat? Do you want that to be a question in a minute?
Well, I'd like it to be at least read out. It's
okay. Well, I'll tell you what.
A very hypothetical question.
Okay, you jump the queue as you read your question out. We won't ask for discussion because I know what it is. It's just interesting to know what some people are thinking, and I think myself the same at times. So read yours out, please. A rhetorical question.
Do I have the courage?
Yeah,
I am thinking that as you, Rachel, had the courage to take the word fascism into your mouth, I will also have the courage to take the word revolution into my mouth, because I'm listening to this. We met once, Rachel, and I am one of those who have left the UK. I am now in Germany. I lived in the UK for 35 years, so I do regard it as my home. But my thoughts really are around the fact that, are we trying to fight a situation that is getting more and more fascist, as you say, with democratic means? Does that ever work? As someone from Iraq, I'm allowed to say that. And I know the UK has never really done revolution. Everyone is too well brought up. Will the UK ever do revolution? So these are my thoughts. I know they're very
I think we all entertain them at times. You don't have to respond to that, Rachel.
No, you don't. It's okay. But I want to throw it into the mix.
Okay, Barbara Lodge, please, your question. You need to unmute.
Okay, thank you. I have unmuted. Hi, Rachel. Actually two. One's a very quick one. It's one about your Bio Yorkshire initiative, which looks really exciting. Does that have any EU links? And the other thing I wanted to raise was about the Conservative Parliamentary Party. How fragile is it? We all come across these events. We think, oh, this is definitely the end for the Conservative Party, and yet they plough on. But at the same time, you see dissent and division, even Theresa May now speaking out, and people criticising Johnson, saying he's not fit for purpose. How fragile do you think the Conservative Party is?
Okay, well, thank you so much. Nadia, I do entertain these thoughts frequently, I have to assure you, and this week I found myself challenging what is democracy, and we certainly don't have a full understanding of democracy, and I think many academic debates it, and ultimately as practitioners, all of us, we have to think about how do we best challenge the system. And our parliamentary system is window dressing compared to, we don't have a lot of power. In other words, it's all held in the hands of the executive, and we need to really try and get a grip of this. So that little group I mentioned previously, we are having these discussions about how on earth do we really challenge back into the system, because there's institutional historical failings which have never been redressed in our country, which continue to determine our state, and that kind of colonialism which roots back, and of course your country, original country, will completely understand that as well. So that these are really big issues of that do need answers, and we need to push for that. Barbara, the Tory party, we all love being commentators on the Tory party. I think it is fascinating watching what is happening, and Labour, we always have our fights in public, don't we? It's disgraceful, but we do. And maybe that's a bit about our honesty, but and other parties do their things their own way. But the Tory party, they scrap. There's no doubt about it. They fall out, but when it comes to the moment, they pull together, and they always do. And we underestimate that loyalty, which is so rooted. I think because we've all got consciences and, you know, we believe things and we're passionate, of course we're going to fall out with each other in the Labour Party. You know, it's almost like we must, you know, our background back in the trade unions, you know, we used to scrap every day, you know, because it was about survival. That's where we come from. But for the Tories, they've got the luxury of, you know, having their little disputes and arguments, and it's all about positioning. And we've got to remember, everybody in the Tory party wants to be prime minister. That's why you go into parliament in the Tory party. In the Labour Party, nobody wants to be prime minister. We all want to be servants of the bigger system. So apart from them all thinking they could do a far better job than the current incumbent, I think they all recognise the genius of Boris Johnson, and he's still there. You know, he's been to hundreds of parties, it would appear, according to the news today, and he's still there, you know, and there's a reason he's still there. Is one, he's really brass-necked and he doesn't care. His object, the only thing he cares about is power, and he's got it and he isn't going to let go of it. And people are going to have to wrestle him, and they don't, because he is a big beast. You know, there's nothing, you know, I remember seeing him coming out of the 1922 committee, which is their equivalent of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And he was like, we're going to get through this. Don't you worry. You'll be absolutely fine. I'll come down to your constituency and I'll come and fight for you. You'll be fine. You know, and he was just talking, you know, and this was after his darkest moment. And he came out fighting. And I didn't spend a lot of time listening to Johnson, because I find him quite fascinating as a communicator, and I've got his election message in my head already. I know exactly what he's going to be saying. He's going to say, but on the big decisions, I got Brexit done, I got COVID done, I got that led on the vaccine, we were world beating on that, on Ukraine, we were there, we stood there, we had the agreements. That's why he's spending all of his time now, you know, gaining his picture taken. He's now a global leader. He's led our countries, leading the world. You know, we get the big decisions right. You know, a few parties, I'm sorry, but everything else, look what I've achieved. And I can just hear him saying that, and I can see the crowds coming in behind him and saying, well done, you are our leader on the big choices. We've got to be able to level up to that as a party. And we have got to have a narrative that works. And I see it, I hear it, what we could be saying, and we've got to rise up to that, because that's what we're up against. And every time Johnson speaks, he says something that just sticks, and he's really clever at it. The only time he failed was when he went off into Peppa Pig world. That was the only time he failed, and that was just sheer arrogance. But it sticks with you, the stuff he says, and he's a master at it. So never underestimate your enemy, and I've never underestimate Johnson, because he's not prime minister for no reason. He got there for a reason, and he ain't going anywhere if he can help it. So we've got our work cut out to pull him down. Thank you very much.
I think I think that's all from us. I'd really these Zooms we had ones with the councillors that you heard about. They're all, if I say they're always so much more inspiring than we expected, that sounds really rude, but you know me well enough to know that's what we mean. You have really inspired us. Martin said you cheered us up, and I know there are not many of us.
I think it was slightly ironic.
but yeah, I know. But it's been a really great evening, and I've been really touched by what you said, and it inspires us. Now, I did indicate in my email that I am recording this on Zoom, and I did intend to put it on YouTube and a link from our website so people can do it. Are you happy for me to do this? And I'm quite happy for you to say no.
Oh, you've had the sanitized version tonight, so of course I am.
Oh God, well, next week we want the real one, the blue one. Okay, well, again, I'll get everybody else to say goodbye. Rachel, have a good evening to what's left of it, and we're very touched you can spend the time for us and be so helpful to us. Thank you very much.